Hi, I'm Danny Elfman.
This is Shirley Manson.
This is Debbie Harry.
This is Chris Stein Blondie.
This is Roland Orzabal from Tears for Fears.
This is Billy Idol.
This is Alex Ebert, a.k.a. Edward Sharp, giving the story behind the song.
Hi, this is Peter Chotty, host of The Story Behind the Song. Each month I speak to some of music's biggest artists to get the inside stories behind their most lasting and iconic songs. Join me for new episodes on the third Monday of every month on The Story Behind the Song from the Consequence Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Book Sellout was released in October 2021. It profiled punk, emo, and hardcore bands in the 90s and 2000s that sold out to a major label. Each profile explains the scene and circumstance of each of these bands, how they got signed, the process of making their sellout record, and the impact it had on them. Though no ska bands are profiled, the genre does pop up a few times, and, as we learn, one ska band was considered. We talked to the book's author, Dan Ozzi, about Sellout, but also about Chris Farren, Jeff Rosenstock, and obviously Glenn Danzig.
You read Sellout yourself, right?
Yeah, I read it with my own eyes.
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook, which is a whole different experience. Dan doesn't read it. They hired an actor to read it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a few funny pronunciations in there.
Oh.
My favorite of which being fat wreck chords.
How far does it fight a punk reader?
You know how it says on flyers when you don't know where the show is, it says ask a punk?
Yeah.
Man, somebody should have done that with Dan Ozzi's book for this actor. A really enjoyable book though. Highly recommend it, and highly recommend listening to the audiobook because you can just do your laundry and wash dishes while you listen to Sellout.
The first thing I wanted to ask you about is Glenn Danzig, specifically his house that you like to photograph.
I do. I heard you had Chris Farren on this and asked him about my love of Danzig, so here I am in person.
Yeah, we need the real story. Yeah, Chris didn't know.
Well, one thing Chris got wrong on that is when you asked him, like, what is there anything special about the house? And he said, no, there's nothing like Danzig about it. That is completely the opposite of the truth. It's so first of all, the neighborhood that it sits in is like very upscale, I guess, or like hip, and it's expensive. Like I can't afford to buy a house there. So all of, it's like very coveted real estate. So all the houses are like very well maintained there, and very cute. And then just in the middle of it, in this like very busy area, is this house that Glenn Danzig, I think still owns. He doesn't live in it, but I've like looked it up on Zillow and stuff. I think he still owns it, but it is very Danzig-y. It's very like, it's again, like it's in this like very nice neighborhood. And there's just this like dilapidated gray house that like is being swallowed back to earth. And it's so funny because we had like an uncharacteristically rainy winter in LA that like really went for like months. Like we just got more rain than I've ever seen. And the weeds in his front yard have grown to, and I'm not joking, like waist high. And like if you look at the house from the side, like all of these like what do you call it? Like what do you call veins that trees make? Branches.
I was gonna say roots, but sure.
Roots, yeah, branches. They're just like swallowing the house back to earth. Like it's like so poorly maintained. There's like the blinds are just askew and everything. It's like such a bleak, like gothy house. So for Chris to say that it's not Danzig-esque at all is such a misrepresentation of the house.
How many people have you taken photos of in front of the house?
Well, okay, so it's like it kind of became a thing where if I was in the area, like it's just like a thing that I like to walk past. Like I want to give the Dan Ozzi tour of Los Angeles, and basically for $50, I will take you to that house, and then I will take you around the block to the coffee shop where the first sketch of I Think You Should Leave was filmed with the door that opens both ways. That's pretty much like the things that people are like, oh, like is this a part of like old Hollywood? I'm like, I don't know, but they filmed that scene from Swingers. So it's like I just started taking pictures of people that I knew in front of the house. And then recently I was like, I have a lot of these, like a lot of these. And I was like, maybe I should just do something with these. But then once I decided that, it didn't feel like I had a lot. It felt like I needed more. So I'm not joking, like made a list of everybody that I know out in Los Angeles. And I've just been asking like, hey, the next time you're over here, can I come take your picture here? So now I'm like actively trying to collect as many as I can. And so when I do something, when I have enough, I will do something with them. And if you guys are ever in Los Angeles, let me know and I'll take you over there. Something about taking pictures of friends. It's just a funny punk landmark, in my opinion.
Do you take all the pictures from the same spot, or are they kind of spread around?
Like I mix it up. Like I have like my certain shots that I like to take, but I like to, in this project, which will reveal itself, I guess, that I've been working on, I have been trying to just like show as much of the like house as I can. Like, I don't want to take the same shot over and over and over again. Like I would like you to come away being like, wow, I really understand the scale of the house now, So yeah, I'm not joking. Like I have like dozens of photos of photos of people in front of the house. And it's just so funny who I have like wanting to do it too. Like I have such a huge list, and like, this is a fucking total name drop, right? But I'm friends with Shirley Manson from Garbage, and her husband Billy like loves the house too. And they're like, when are you going to take our picture in front of there? I'm like, fucking anytime. I will race over there to take your picture in front. So I'm like, just all these like funny people. And some are my friends who have like no public persona whatsoever and just like wanted to be photographed in front of. And then some are Shirley Manson. So it's just like, I have such a huge collection. It's what I have, like a really compulsive personality. And so I just like start documenting things compulsively, and then I can't stop. So that's one of my many like projects that like one day I will put into the world in some capacity.
Have you been interested in taking photographs for a while?
Yes. Actually, I've been doing it for like 5 years. If you want to hear how I started taking pictures, I would love to talk about it.
I'm interested, yeah, because then some of the stuff you post on Instagram is really cool.
Oh, thanks.
Like your photos you took from your recent trip to Greece, for instance.
Yeah. Well, okay. So basically, it's like this. Like when I was working at this website, Noisy, this music website, and I was there for like 5 or so years. And I was getting like a little burned out. Like I like writing about music, but when you are made to do it every day, day after day for 5 years, you get a little burned out. And so I was like kind of feeling creatively burned out. And at the same time, I remember one night I was like backing up all of my photos onto like Google Photos. And in the time I had been doing that job, I saw some really cool shit. And nothing like, I didn't see like Nirvana's first show or anything like that, but I just saw like bands that did pretty well for themselves. I saw their first shows. I saw their last shows. I saw some really cool, just us hanging out stuff. And I was like looking at my photos and I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool if I had like better than like iPhone 5 blurry ass looking photos, and so I just bought a camera. I bought this camera called the Ricoh GR2, which is just like a small pocket, like point and shoot camera. And I just like taught myself how to use it. And I just brought it everywhere and I was taking pictures. And then I went to Greece again at that time. I think that was 2018 or so, 2019. And I brought it there, and then I went to Croatia and I took all these like awesome photos because Dubrovnik is like very photogenic city. It's like these orange roofs. I like photographed that, and I just like got super into it. And I got home and I bought this other camera called the Fuji X100F. And so, yeah, I just started like, I always since then have had a camera on me, and I've just been acquiring more fucking cameras, like not like anything expensive, but I bought like a portrait camera because sometimes Chris Farren or somebody or like one of my friends is like, can you take a portrait of me? And so I bought like a Canon for that. And I have like film cameras and Polaroid cameras. And so I just got like a little bit like, but I just like really, again, like it feeds into my compulsive like desire to be a documentarian. And I fucking wish that I had done it sooner. And whenever like young like writers ask me what advice I have, I'm like, buy a camera. And they think that I'm like joking, but I'm like, no, buy a camera. You will need it in the future. So yeah, I just always like have something on. I keep that motherfucking thing on me, you know?
So when you were in Greece, you got in a car wreck while you were there?
I got into a head-on collision, like a head-to-head collision. It was so fucking scary. Like basically like, you know, it's in Greece, it's a lot of like really narrow dirt unfinished roads, and it's a lot like here in LA where, you know, like there's only space for one car, so one car pulls over, the other one goes, and then the other, you know, like you kind of like have a little system with the person that's coming forward. So we were like on a dirt road. My friend Spiro was driving, and we like pulled over, and like two cars passed, and then we started to go. And as soon as we started to go, like Spiro hit the brakes because there was this like Sprinter van coming so fucking fast at us. And so Spiro just like slammed on the brakes. And unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe this like one stretch where we stopped there was like a stone wall on the right side and like a little farmhouse on the left side. So it was like kind of a narrow passageway. So we were kind of like stopped at the base of that, and this Sprinter van saw us, and he was coming so fast, and he slammed on the brakes, and it was kind of like he was on ice almost, because like he started drifting like diagonally towards us, like because he slammed the brakes so hard, and he was going so fast, and he hit the farmhouse and bounced off. And like that probably saved our lives because it like slowed him down a little bit. And but he still like ended up hitting us head to head. And weirdly enough, like we were okay for a head-on collision. Like we all took that moment to be like, okay, is everybody okay? Because we had like two boys in the car, like two 8-year-old boys in the car. And we were like, yeah, we're all okay. And then we like got out of the car, and one of the boys, Brixton, he was 8. And he just goes to the other driver. He just goes, come on, this is our rental. But like, yeah, we like fucking survived that. It was really nuts, but not the optimal vacation activity.
Yeah, the idea of getting in a car wreck in another country just seems extra stressful.
Not just on another country too. We were on like an island, which is a small island off of another island. So we had to get a pickup truck to come get us. But since he was coming from like far away, like he had to take like ferries to come, he didn't get there till like after 10 p.m. So we were just like in the hot sun, like while the sun was going down, just like sunscreening up and waiting for this car. And then finally after like 10, he came, and then we had to go get a replacement car, and they gave us another replacement car until our replacement car got there. So every time we got a new car, we had to go to another island to pick it up. So it was like an entire morning every time we had, like just so fucking inconvenient. Thank God we had like my friend's brother's girlfriend, Eleni, was in the car, and she speaks Greek, like she's Greek. And so thank God she was in the car, because like, she could communicate with the other people and like with the tow truck service and everything. I was like, oh man, yeah, because that would have been bad.
Yeah, so I asked Chris, is there any questions I should ask Dan? And he said,
here we go.
Ask him about my wedding.
He wants me to tell the story of his wedding because it prompts me to say what is almost what is the worst word that you can say? Like almost the worst word that you can say. And it makes me so uncomfortable to say it. So I will say it one time and then we'll move on. But Chris had a wedding in Florida, which was like so much fun. He, Florida has just wonderful outdoor like life, like animal life. So there were a lot of frogs there. I remember there being like frogs at the wedding. It also like rained in the middle of it, which was actually really beautiful because like it was at the end and people were just like outside in their suits and dresses, like dancing to Purple Rain in the rain. It was actually a really fun wedding. But I came back to the hotel and I just took off my suit at the end of the night and realized, and this is where it sounds like I'm cursing, please do not edit this weird, but it sounded, I was like, my legs were covered in chigger bites. Like the back of my leg, the back of my thighs were just these like red bumps, like, and it looked really bad. Like it looked so bad. And I was like, what is this? Like, what the fuck is this? And somebody who was from Florida was just like, oh yeah, that's chiggers. And I was like, what? And I just had like just these disgusting red bumps. And it's just so weird because like obviously I didn't take my pants off at the wedding. Like how did they get all up in there? I don't know. But it was so fucking gross. But really fun wedding.
My understanding of chiggers is they smell fresh meat, like when you're not native to the area.
They could tell I was one of them city folk.
Yeah, and it like the first time is always the worst, apparently.
Yeah, they're like, this guy's never been to Fest. Let's bite him. So yeah, but that was a very fun wedding. But I had like these truly this like disgusting rash looking thing all over my thighs for like a few days after that.
Dang.
You wrote this article about Jeff Rosenstock for Noisy when Worry came out. Worry's the album where Jeff is really getting a lot of press and a lot of notice from people outside of the circle he had been, in previously. But your article I thought was really interesting because you went with him to Tijuana.
Yeah.
And you guys all like walked across the border, I believe, a group of like 17 people.
Yeah. It's funny because I just recently got asked to write about Jeff for a different publication. And I was thinking of going and rereading that one, but I don't know. Sometimes I don't like reading old things, but that I've written. I mean, but I do remember that being a good time. And I do remember also too, that being a time where I was like, yeah, I wish I had a fucking camera on me. Like we did have a photographer there, Erica, but like, I was like, yeah, I wish I had my own camera. But yeah, Jeff in the lead up to Worry was like decided that he was going to play a show in Tijuana with Chris and Hard Girls, I think. And also Jordan from Roswell Kid came. He wasn't playing, but he came. And basically there's two ways to do a show in Tijuana is like you can drive across the border or you can just like basically drive all the way to this like motel in San Diego that's like right at the lip and just walk over. And so we did that. We just walked over and we carried like guitars and basses. And I think they had been told that like the venue would have some sort of backline and like amps and stuff. So we didn't have to go like super heavy on that. But yeah, like 17 of us or something just like walked across the border. And this was like, the time when Trump was running for president. And at that point, the most horrific thing he had said was like, we have to build the wall. Obviously that has been replaced by like probably 20,000 more horrific things. But it was like a very build that wall, like Mexico is bad. They're sending their worst people, so it was like a very weird time to just like walk across the border. And then, yeah, we got to Tijuana and like, I don't know, man, Jeff is like a really special person that he can just show up places and just some fucking mod bar in Tijuana. And there were, I mean, like it wasn't like a ton of kids, but it was full, like, I don't know, 70, 75 people. I don't know, 100 people. Like, it was a small bar, so it felt full. If 75, it might have even been less than that. But yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the article you also, I thought, was interesting because you talked about sort of what was going on with Trump, and because also Jeff, I feel like, was commenting on that time period as well, and not a lot of people were yet really commenting on it.
Yeah.
And so it was a nice way to sort of tie it all together. Like, we're going to Mexico.
But I also remember it maybe this is one of the reasons that I don't read it back, is because it feels a little bit, I don't know, like, looking back at it, I look at the person who wrote it and look at all of us at that time as like a very naive person, because I was writing that article being like, yeah, we're going to Mexico during this like really scary time where this guy's running for president. But it felt very safe because you were like, yeah, but like Hillary's going to win the fucking election, So like it felt like, yeah, it's scary, but also it's scary that this guy's running. But, like, it's just thinking like when was that? 2016?
I think so, yeah.
Thinking like your 2016 self. Oh, no. That had to have been like 20. Christ, I'm like, Biden won in 2020, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, Trump won the first time in 2016. So that was like, yeah, it was just like we were all really naive and thinking that could never happen. I thought that it would, because I wrote an article that surmised that he would, just because I have such little confidence in America. But at the same time, there was definitely like, oh, no. We have like guardrails in place to make sure this won't happen. But obviously it didn't. So when I look back at that article, I think it was almost like a bit of like cheeky fiction where I'm like, ooh, wouldn't it be dangerous if this racist became president,
Yeah, I around a couple months before the election, I wrote an article about a couple comedians here in Sacramento. And we went to some bar that was in like kind of a rural town, and it was just because that's where they happened to be playing. That wasn't the nature of the article, but it was so tense. The people there were clearly like, there was a percentage of them that were Trump fans, and the comedians were just not, they were being antagonistic about the Trump thing. And I remember like, on the way back home, we're like, God, I can't wait for this to be over. That was.
Oh, I know, right? You were just like, oh, just a few more months, and then we won't have to think about this ever again. Like, I almost missed that naivety that we all had, But in a way, like, I don't want to say like the presidency of Trump was good, certainly, but I do think it like activated a lot of people politically, or like woke up some people who were like really sleeping through Obama, like, I don't want to like, I don't know, I'm not smart enough to like talk politics really, but I do think that like some people who had never been politically engaged before finally saw like the inequalities of this country and like what a thin line our entire government hangs on, and like for people like us who like grew up on punk, we have like some awareness of that. But I think if you just were a person who just like listened to pop radio your whole life and like watched The Office or whatever, like you don't think about that, right?
Yeah.
So like in a weird way, like 2016 was kind of cool in that it made everybody punk, but obviously it was awful for many, many, many reasons. It just, I don't know, if there's one good thing to have come out of it, everybody sounded like a fucking NWA record all of a sudden. Like everybody sounded like Rage Against the Machine suddenly, and that's, I don't know, a positive.
So Chris Farren played that show. And,
yes, I love that this is a Chris Farren based podcast. I'm not joking. I am very glad that he played that show. Yes, he said it was so bad. I don't remember it being bad, and I do have a few photos from it. Again, maybe this is why I love documenting things that, like, I don't know. It just, I don't remember it being as bad as he was saying. It was let me put it this way. It was like a mod bar in Tijuana, and I'm sure from their perspective, it was not the highest quality of like equipment and room that they've ever played in before. But I just don't remember it being that bad. I remember like Casey from Fake Problems came and he played with Chris. Like, what did he play? Bass or something like that? But like he played with Chris. I don't remember too much else about his set. I thought it was a good set. I don't remember what his recollection was so bad, why it was so bad. I have a picture of him going through TSA and like explaining his weird, like why his guitar has like mirrors all over it and stuff like that. Not TSA. Is that what it's called when right? Like the Border Patrol. I maybe if Chris wants to ride this like legend that's his worst show, like I'm here to back him up on it. I just don't remember it as being particularly off.
Do you remember his reasoning for why he has mirrors all over his guitar?
Chris is like, like since Chris sang my praises on his episode, I'm going to sing Chris's praises on my episode.
Yeah.
Chris is just like a really good solo performer. He has a drummer now, but he's like for a while he was just playing by himself, and he's really, really good at making a show feel like it's not just one person up there playing. He has like a really good stage design. A lot of his like equipment is like very flashy and memorable. Like he has like, like lights on his nightstand. He has like all these weird projections, and like I feel like his guitar strap lights up and his guitar is reflect like he's just like, I don't know, he's very like showy, and he sounds awesome. Like he doesn't sound like it's like one person, and I really think he kind of like perfected that art of like being a one-man show that doesn't feel like you're just watching one fucking guy masturbate up there, he's great. He's a really fun visual artist.
Nice.
But in Mexico, it was like just him. Maybe that's why he felt that it was so rough. It was like, he was just very exposed out there.
All right. So back to your noisy days, you wrote an article. None of you motherfuckers wrote about the 20th anniversary of Catch-22's Keasbey Nights, so I guess I'll do it.
Yeah. That was me being like, I don't have it in me right now. I think I just like at that time didn't have the time to sit there and do a full anniversary piece about Keasbey Nights. But I don't remember what came out at that time. Like at that time, it was just like a bunch. I don't remember like the, what albums got the Pitchfork like revisited treatment at that time. But I was like looking and I was like, man, Keasbey Nights is like 20 this year. Nobody's going to write about this. And then I remembered like who else? Yeah, it's going to be me if it's going to be anybody. But then I was just like, I just don't have the time. So that was my way of like skirting it and just kind of doing a cop out and being like, this album's awesome. I maybe one day, maybe for the 25th, if that hasn't passed, I will do a real deep dive into that album because I still love it.
I think this year is the 25th.
Oh, I see you called my bluff, and now I got to
do it.
By the way, so I don't remember the name of it, but there's I wrote about it in my newsletter a few months ago. But this guy. I grew up like in the going to shows in the tri-state area and largely in New Jersey. And some guy has done this like yeoman's work of compiling all of these like New Jersey at the turn of the century demos and EPs and stuff like that. And it's just a huge Jersey database of like bands. Like I looked through it for hours, like unlocking so many memories. I'm like, oh, wait, that was an opening band. That was an opening band. I saw them. Oh, my friend's boyfriend was in this band, like that kind of thing. And just taking that like nostalgia trip. But like a lot of the stuff I don't think is probably very interesting to somebody outside the state of New Jersey. However, the Catch-22 demo is on there, and it's a lot of the like early versions of what became Keasbey Nights songs. And I am embarrassed to tell you how much play I got out of that. Like a really large amount.
Yeah, I read that that post, and I listened to it as well, and because the the article was like, I miss like shitty recordings, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
And it there is something about that recording that really I'd never heard it before, but it really captures the shittiness of that specific era to the point where it gave me nostalgic feelings, even though I'd never heard it before.
And that's like the best version of like sounding shitty, because like the musicianship on that record is really good. Like on the proper recorded version, it sounds great. But on that demo, it's like really rough. But the songs are so well written, and that's maybe like what I was saying that I missed about things sounding shitty. It's just like you really like it made you work for it. But then when something sounded awesome, like when you could just tell, like shitty recording or not, like this person's got it. Like they can write a fucking song,
Yeah. I want to hear a little bit about your time in the scene when you were growing up. I know when we spoke at the Silver Sprocket event, you talked about how there was.
Are we going to talk about that, by the way?
Let's talk about that.
That was it was a very funny event. A lot of fun. Great meeting you. Have you told this story on this podcast of like that event?
I don't think you
have.
So.
No. May I?
Please, let's hear your take on it.
So the folks at Silver Sprocket in San Francisco invited me to do an event for the like Litquake thing that happens there. And I was down to do it. I had to drive up from LA, and those people are so great. The one downside is that they really like, we did not announce that till like the day before. So it was like not a lot of people there, but it was still fun. And when we got there, they were like, okay, so like, guys, this is going to be the format. Like a couple of like our artists and poets are like going to speak for a little bit. And then like at 8:00, we have this guy who I think they said he had like a punk radio show or something. I'm not trying to slag him off. I'm not going to name him, but they said he had like a punk radio show. And they were like, okay, so like Aaron is going to read a section from his book, and then this guy is going to interview Aaron. Then at 9:00, Dan is going to read from his book, and this guy's going to interview Dan. And we were like, cool, that sounds good. And so you did a reading from your book that went over well. And then you sat down and this guy was interviewing you, and it was like just going rough. Like you were doing a great job, but like he was not on top of his game. And I am like watching. I remember at one point he said something like, he was like, okay, so like what's right now let's have, what do you think is the, and like, it was just a question that just like trailed off. And I remember Aaron, you said something like, what do you want me to do? Like, what do you want? And so I'm watching this and just being like, oh God, I'm like watching my future death up there. So I like my turn, 9:00, like I went up, I read like a couple pages from my book. And then I was just like, oh, and before I just want to tell a quick story about those pages. And I told this quick story, and then I was kind of like, oh, actually, also, too, that reminded me of this other tangent. And I was like kind of talking for what I thought was too long. I was like, oh, they probably want to get to the interview. And I like look at the guy who put on the show, and he was making the like stretch it out motion. And I was like, okay. And I was like, I just kept talking. And by some miracle, I managed to do an hour of like unscripted talking, and it just worked. But then like afterwards they told me, they were just like, oh yeah, that guy just like left. And I was like, oh, okay, so like there was nobody to interview me if I hadn't just babbled on. But Adam from Jawbreaker was there, and and it was a fun event.
Yeah, so Adam from Jawbreaker was there, and you had no idea he was there, and you had
because he had a mask on.
Yeah, and you at one point during the conversation, you just talked about how much Jawbreaker meant to you.
I know, it was so cheesy. I was like, man, and I was like talking, I was like, yeah, and then I got to meet Jawbreaker, and who like Jawbreaker's just, I grew up with them. Oh my God, Jawbreaker's the greatest band. If those Jawbreaker guys were here right now, I would suck them off. And and like meanwhile, this guy's like right here, and I'm like, oh, that's embarrassing. After the fact, I realized it, but he's really cool.
And so during your conversation too, you were
I thought one of the funniest parts is you were like, it's like, normally there's someone up here asking me questions, but now I'm just thinking of questions in my head and then I'm answering them.
Yes, that's pretty much how I move through my day anyway, just answering fake interview questions. But okay, so I'm sorry, I totally derailed us. So we did that event. Where were you going with this? I'm sorry, I forgot.
Oh wait, we'll come back to where I was going. There was another thing that you talked about at that event. I want you to relay this story here. You talked quite a bit about Gilman because you're in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And you said that you grew up not going to Gilman because you were on the other side of the coast. So when you were writing Sellout, you felt like you had to really, really, really research Gilman intensely because you didn't want to mess up Gilman.
Yeah, I don't want to be the guy who gets it wrong and then 80 million Bay Area punks like yell at me,
So there, you had heard some story about a dead body found at Gilman.
Oh yeah, I gotta like reread this section a bit more before I just start telling it over and over again because I'm probably butchering it, but I'm like looking for it right now and I don't. Shit, where is that book? It's a book called "Give Me Something Better."
Mm-hmm.
It's like a really exhaustive oral history of the Bay Area. And I really should reread this part, but I'm like relaying what I remember from memory, which is that, like Gilman opens and it's like a free speech space. And the thing that happens with any free speech space happened to Gilman, which is somebody took it too far, right? Like it started out, which is in like a very positive, cool way where it was just like, the Yeasty Girls like doing like feminist rap. And it's like, okay, that's cool. And then like eventually some people like started taking their newfound freedom of speech too far. And they were like, I think this one person like brought like a dead dog and like wrapped it around their shoulders during their set or something like that. And it was like really gross. And it was like pushing the limits of like good taste. Like it was maybe free speech. But then like somebody took it like even further and like dug up a corpse of some sort and like brought it, like I want to say it was like a child's corpse and like brought it to Gilman. And I think once they did that, like the light came on at the party and they realized like, oh, fuck, like this is too far. And they like tried to like stash it at Gilman, like by the soundboard. And I think if my memory is correct, like it was Tim Armstrong who like basically called the cops and was like, listen, we have this situation. We're willing to work with you to help you. The only thing we ask is that like when this gets written up in the newspaper that you do not mention Gilman Street because we don't want, this is just some fucking weirdo who did this. Like it's not us. We don't want to be associated with this. We're just like helping you get to the bottom of it or whatever. I do have to reread that section because I may be messing the details up, but it is something along the lines of that. And it's really fucking fascinating. And like in researching it Gilman so much, like I really thought I knew everything. I was reading like the same like descriptions of it a million times, but then that like part of that book like stood out to me. It's a really good oral history, like really well researched.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and reread that book too because I don't remember that part. I remember the part with the dead dog. But I don't remember the part with the dead body.
I think that, I can't go get the book because then I'll disconnect my microphone. But I remember, hold on. I'm just going to Google Gilman Street, dug up corpse. I don't know. Yes. It was in the San Francisco Weekly a few years ago. Listen. Jeremy Adkins doesn't look like a one-time grave robber as he rides up to the courtyard near the Fruitvale BART station on his bicycle. He doesn't lug around a pickaxe or have soil under his fingernails, but he's the one who stashed the dead baby at the Hallowed Punk Collective at 924 Gilman Street in Berkeley, a darker moment left out of Corbett Redford's new Green Day produced documentary, Turn It Around. It was something that was dumb, but why not? Adkins says, like you get a bad idea, and instead of a better one coming along, you keep that bad idea all day long, and you end up doing it. Yeah, you know how that goes.
Yeah, sure.
So yes, the guy's name is Jeremy Adkins, and he dug up a baby's corpse and brought it to Gilman. The cops were finally called the next morning, but after Adkins had stashed the baby at 924 Gilman, quote, the one place stupid enough to trust him with keys. The police rounded up everyone at the house in Oakland thinking that there were fresh corpses there instead of bones that had been, so there was like bones that had been there for 130 years, if that means anything. Police showed up at Gilman Street while Rancid was practicing to look for the child's body. They didn't find her, but Tim Armstrong of Rancid later found her in a Tower Records bag in the sound booth. Fuck, that's so dark.
God damn.
That's so... I would have loved to have heard that part on the like Turn It Around documentary where Tim's just like, yo, so I looked in this Tower Records bag, right? And there was a baby in there, right? And I was like, this is a song about a dead baby in a bag. It's called fucking, I don't know.
Time Bomb.
Yeah.
It's called Time Bomb.
So yeah, that's a real story. I did not fucking just make that up.
Damn.
That reminds me, like, I don't know if this story is true, but back in the 90s, my friend told me that this band, Four Skid and 500, were on their way to a gig, and then they saw like a bunch of, dead carcasses, animal carcasses on the road, and they're like, "Hey, we should grab these up. This would be some great props for our show." And they, sure enough, they put all these dead carcasses on themselves. They played a show. And then they got gangrene.
Oh,
that was the story.
You know what? No risk, no reward.
Yeah.
That I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. But there definitely was at that time, I think, like a handful of musicians that were thinking 2 steps ahead. Like, how are we going to shock people?
Yeah, total. That was the word I was just going to use, is like shock. Like it went from like, like it was like probably, I don't know if this was the same time, but like the G.G. Allen time where it was like punk mean shocking people. I don't know. Also too, I think it was just one person who just went too fucking far, we don't have to like cast a broader social trend on it. It was just one guy who just had a really stupid fucking idea. Or maybe like putting it in a Tower Records bag was like a commentary, man, on like the corporatization of music. I think man.
So yeah. So at that show, the Silver Sprocket event, we were talking a little bit before the show, and you were talking about the scene you grow up in and how there was a lot of mixed bills, and how ska was present on those bills a lot.
Yeah, I don't know, like if I don't know if that was unique to like the New Jersey area or not, or just like the late 90s. But I remember like going to shows because I wanted to see one band, or going to a show because I had nothing else to do and that's where everybody was. And there was like 7 bands on the fucking bill. It like started at like 2:30 in the afternoon. And you'd have like, I don't know, like I think now we're really into like micro genre labels. But at that time, like, yeah, stuff was like ska or emo core or whatever, but like everything fell under this like umbrella of like non-corporate rock, right?
Yeah.
I feel like you remember that time where it was just like rock music and you didn't think too much about it. And there was like, there would be like a ska opener. Like I'm trying to think of the ones from that website that I was talking about, but like there was this one called Professor Plum. They used to open every fucking show that was, and they were like, had a very ska, like, horn section and everything. But then also there would be right after that, there'd be like a Sunny Day Real Estate type of band, and then also too, there would be like a moshy hardcore band. And at that time, like, it just all seemed like this is what shows are. And now I feel like it's very, I don't know. Now I feel like it's very much like, okay, you could be a band in like Minnesota and have a certain sound, and you could get connected with a band in San Diego who sounds a lot like you, and you say like, oh, let's get one more band that sounds like us and go on tour together, and you get like 3 bands that all make sense together. But like pre-internet, it was just like, yeah, let me just ask the guys that I know from college or high school or whatever, and they play in a ska band, so like and we're a hardcore band, but like they're the band that we know, you know what I mean? Like it was more like just locally based, and you kind of just like take your pickings where you can get them. That's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, I mean, when my band went on tour, my ska band went on tour in the mid '90s. It was like, I think we played with like 3 or 4 ska bands total, and like over the course of like 3 tours, it was just like whatever punk, alternative rock, hardcore, whatever bands were around, that's who we played with. And it just made sense because it was like the punk scene, the DIY scene. And within that was a whole bunch of different genres.
Yeah, I kind of miss that. Like, I don't know, like, because I would watch those. Like, that's probably the reason that I have a like more diverse palette for that kind of stuff, is because like I was just open. Like when I like, I feel like now I'm such a snark. Like I go to a show, I like want to see the band I want to see, and then that's kind of like it. I'm like, it's like the lazy man's way of doing it. But when I was like a teenager, I wanted to see every band, and I wanted to stand right in front of the speaker. I wanted to like be up there and like just that was like a mark of like cool to me. So like at that time I was just like watching every band, because like now I like going to shows, but also I have a lot going on in my life. At that time when I was like 16, 17, like shows were the biggest thing that you could be doing, right? Like it was like, so I just like wanted to be completely immersed in it at that time. And so, yeah, I just feel like as a result of that, I was just way more open to like different sounds.
What were the main venues that you went to at that time period?
So I've talked probably more about this than anybody else in the world, but there was a venue. So I grew up in Staten Island, New York, and there was this venue there when I first started going to shows called The Joint. And The Joint was just this like hole in the wall, kind of like VFW hall looking place in a kind of a sketchy part of town. And it was like shows every Friday night, and they were like $5-6, and it was like 5 bands and 5-6 bands, whatever. And it was, it was like a bunch of like local bands from like Staten Island, Brooklyn, Philly, Jersey. And then there were usually like a couple of bands from like upstate, like in New Paltz specifically. There were a couple bands from New Paltz, and maybe like a touring band too, which if you look back, there were like a couple biggish ones. I think like Avail played there. I think like Snapcase or Botch or whatever played there. But that was the big venue for me growing up, because it was like on Staten Island. Then once me and my friends got cars and we started going to New Jersey, there were VFW halls. There was like the M&M Hall. There was this place called Birch Hill, which was like a larger venue, a little bit larger. There's a place called Club Benet, which changed its name to Club Chrome. And then when I was in college, that was like when that New Brunswick scene was happening. Mm-hmm. So there were shows in basements a lot. There were shows at Jeff Rickley from Thursday's Basement at 221 Somerset. There was like also too, if the shows were too big, there was like the Melody Bar and another place that I'm forgetting at the moment. But yeah, and then also too, I was like close enough that I could drive to the First Unitarian Church in Philly if I wanted to go to a show there. And then I was also close enough to Manhattan too, where I was like going to ABC No Rio a lot. And at that time, Brownies. And I like went to some shows at CBGB's, but like by the time I started going to shows, like CBGB's felt very over already, and Coney Island High, which was like one of the first like really cool places that I went to when I was young.
Before you wrote Sellout, you wrote an article for Vice about the Sellout albums in like 2015.
Mm.
A lot of the same bands that you would put in the book were in there, but there's a lot of others too. Less Than Jake was the ska band that was on that list.
Yeah.
Did you consider Less Than Jake as a band for your book?
Yeah, there were a bunch of bands that I had to like make Sophie's choices about. And really like what it came down to, like what those choices came down to for me was, like in case anybody hasn't read it, each chapter of that book is about one band's major label record, major label debut record. And so each one is about one specific album, really. And the chapters go chronologically to tell you this like 12, 13-year history. And I really, like in my ideal world, I wanted to have one album per year. And for a while, the book does that. Like Green Day Dookie 94, Jawbreaker Dear You 95, Jimmy Eat World 96, Blink-182 97. It almost did it. But then, like I got to some places where there's 3 albums that I really wanted to cover, but I thought it was like too close together. So I did have to make like a couple of Sophie's choices, but like Less Than Jake, absolutely. And I was really glad that I got Less Than Jake in there by way of Jimmy Eat World, because the same guy who signed Jimmy Eat World, Craig Aronson, also signed Less Than Jake, and like around the same time. And I believe if you go on Discogs, there's like a cassette sampler that Capitol Records made, which had 2 Less Than Jake songs on one side and 2 Jimmy Eat World songs on the other side. And it was just like a little promo sampler. So those 2 bands are like weirdly very connected in their like start in the major label world.
Yeah, the other connection they have is that Fueled by Ramen released a Jimmy Eat World EP.
Right. I feel like that's how, I could be wrong, but I feel like that's how, like, I feel like Less Than Jake prompted them to do that. Yeah, I don't know, but I just know that they're like forever connected because they were like 2 signings of Capitol Records in that same year.
Yeah, I remember talking to Vinny about this, and I can't remember it completely, but I feel like that EP was in between records when there was that weird gap with Jimmy Eat World where they were like kind of waiting. And then I think they got permission to put that EP out on Fueled by Ramen.
Yes. Like the story goes that like, they finished Clarity, which is in hindsight, like I think everybody would agree, just like sort of a masterpiece album of theirs. But it was just sitting there. Like they had the artwork done, they had the album recorded, and it just sat there. And they couldn't do anything with it until Capitol gave them like a release date. And they were not getting one. And it was kind of becoming like a little bit evident that they were not, like it might just get shelved. And yeah, they somehow talked them into like letting Fueled by Ramen put out like an EP. And they did. And that got a little play. And also too, like Lucky Denver Mint from that album was in the Drew Barrymore movie Never Been Kissed. And so it got a little bit of play like on the radio. And so suddenly Capitol Records was like, oh yeah, okay, we'll put this out. And then by the time they got around to doing it, like it fell out of rotation, like it just, Capitol really botched Clarity, which is so funny because it could have been huge for them. Maybe, I don't know. But yeah, they really botched that.
Yeah. I think the other connection too, or the other parallels with those bands too, is that both of those bands got bigger with later records than their initial major label signing, and they switched labels, both of them.
Yeah,
like Less Than Jake, their biggest record was 2003's Anthem.
Was that on Fat or like what was that?
No, that was so they did 2 for Capitol, and then they were on Fat, and then they went on I think Warner Brothers, and they released Anthem, and then The Science of Selling Yourself Short I think was like the single. That's like I don't know, it's not like a big single, but it's definitely the biggest Less Than Jake single.
Chris from Less Than Jake, I think I interviewed him for the like just sort of like the extra material that went into the paperback for Sellout. And I like talking to him because he was like one of those guys, like one of the few guys, like I can kind of name them on one hand, who really like came from the punk world. And when it came to like selling out or doing a major label record, they were like, no, like why wouldn't we want to do that? Like, I want our music to be so big. And like, even the rest of his band was like, no, like, let's just be on Fat Records, or let's be on what, like they had just like low goals. But Chris was the one who was like, no, like I want to be David Lee Roth. I don't understand. Like, why would we not, why? So I just find it interesting when people like don't have the hangups about that. And I know he's friends with Mark Hoppus, and Hoppus is another guy who's in Sellout, and he really is like, Mark came from nothing. Like Mark was like literally dirt poor. Like he lived in the fucking desert in just like dirt fields, and like when it came to getting like a major label record, he was like, yes, I want that. I don't want to be poor anymore. Like I don't want to like live in poverty anymore. So like, I don't know. Green Day too, like came from a really shitty town. And they, did it too. So I don't know, something that gets lost on the Sellout divide, which I don't know if I went into in the book, is that there's a real socioeconomic privilege that you have to tell people not to make money off of their art.
Yeah, definitely. Tim and Matt, they were determined to make a living with music even before Rancid. There's definitely, because they I don't think they came from anything either. So there's definitely certain people that, like you say, they didn't come from money, so it means something different. Like the idea of selling out doesn't really compute.
Yeah.
So like when Less Than Jake, when they put out their first major label record, I'm curious how this would have been as a chapter, because I don't remember it being a big deal too much. I don't remember it being particularly all that interesting, but I do think there was one thing about their story that I think you've talked about before, and that's that Less Than Jake didn't have any hits or anything, but they seemed to be one of the bigger ska bands on the scene because they had the major label resources, even though they didn't have the hits. So it definitely propelled them to this level, like kind of equal to like Real Big Fish and Goldfinger and these other bands that actually did have singles at the time.
Yeah, I mean, like even bands that like quote unquote were quote unquote failed by the major label system.
Yeah.
Right. Like if nothing else, they like Jimmy Eat World, Less Than Jake, what they got out of it, like they were on a label who like did not know what to do with them, like didn't know how to market them, didn't know how to get them on the radio, didn't really understand the scene that they were coming from. But if nothing else, like the one thing that they got, which was like, talking about how things sounded like shit back then. They got records that sounded really good.
Yeah.
They got like, high 5 or low 6-figure recording budgets. And so they got to make records that like sounded worlds better than the shitty demo tapes that were at the merch table next to them. So yeah, like I think that like even if your label like didn't know what to do with you, I think the bands that did the best were the ones that were like, oh no, we just need the record and we'll go work, we'll go tour. And like I think Less Than Jake was one of those bands. They were like, yeah, no, thank you for like recording this album properly. Now we're gonna go tour and be like the most popular band on any tour that we do. Like it was like kind of like having a free, like I don't know, like they got like a good record out of it, and that's kind of, if nothing else, like I don't know, a step up from their peers.
Yeah, because I remember when Less Than Jake, they put out Pezcore. It was on Dill Records, and then Mike left Skink and Pickle, and it was on Asian Man. That record at that level was blowing up. I mean, it basically made Mike Park's like record label a very profitable, thing.
I'm saying Pezcore still?
Yeah, Pezcore.
Mm-hmm.
So as an indie record, that was doing incredibly well. And then they did the 2 Capitol records, and I remember I remember in '98 they headlined a Ska Against Racism, and they were just like kind of not their fault, but they were kind of outshining the tour and sort of the message of the tour, because they were so like, kids were coming specifically because they were freaking out about Less Than Jake. So they were like becoming stars in this weird way where they weren't like, again, they weren't on the radio, but they were like really growing.
Yeah. I mean, they played the long game, you know, like they weren't looking to have like a breakout record.
Yeah.
They were looking to be in it for the long haul.
I can't remember. So in the Blink-182 chapter, I can't remember did you get into their booker, Rick Bondi, Tahoe Agency?
Oh yeah. I don't think I talked to him. I think he's mentioned in it. Because at that time they hired two guys named Rick DeVoe as their manager and Rick Bondi as their like booking agent.
Yeah, because that's an interesting connection to skas, because Rick Bondi was basically booking all the ska bands.
Yeah.
And Blink-182.
See, this is like what I mean about like everything just being like more connected in the indie rock world.
Yeah.
Where, like, I just think it's so funny that like now Jim Adkins, Mark Hoppus, and Chris DeMakes are friends. You know, like and like those three bands like don't sound like, they're obviously like different sounding, but they're kind of all this, like, I don't know. It's just funny because it's just people making music, and it's us who like micro genres everything to death, you know?
Were you aware of the fact that the Tahoe Agency was referred to as the Skaho Agency?
No, I didn't know the history of Tahoe. That's funny.
The Blue Meanies, the singer for Blue Meanies, he named it the Skaho Agency. And it caught on, yes. Oh yeah, one more thing about Blue Meanies and Blink-182. Since you got the inside with Blink-182, I've heard stories that we had Blue Meanies on the podcast, and they were in Australia at the same time as Blink-182.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they had told someone like, "Hey, let them know that we're playing at this show." And I think their response was something like, "Are Blue Meanies still scaring kids?" So, yeah,
my Blue Meanies knowledge is fairly limited.
Your book, Sellout, begins. It really kind of starts with Green Day being this sort of ground zero with punk rock. You know, punk rock's relationship with the mainstream. But we're also kind of talking a little bit about Nirvana's Nevermind, which was like 3 years earlier. Our Band Could Be Your Life. The thesis of Our Band Could Be Your Life was that Nirvana's Nevermind was like the moment that punk rock kind of broke into the mainstream, essentially, and that this is the story of the bands that built the infrastructure that allowed them to, you know, break into this mainstream world. Whereas your book is kind of like this is sort of the aftermath of punk rock breaking into the mainstream. So, and I feel like you begin as Green Day is this really important moment, but do you have any thoughts about sort of that 3-year period between Nevermind and Dookie?
Yeah, I'm actually like I have Our Band Could Be Your Life in my hands right now, and I'm like trying to remember this one. I love the book truly, but there's one line in it that was so like weirdly dismissive, and I kind of like took it as a challenge to write Sellout. Like, I'm trying to find it right now, but it said something like yeah, as we all know, like once a band went to a major label, they made their worst work.
Yeah.
And to me, I was just like, wait, who says? Like, I want to do this. So I can't find it right now. But to answer your question, that period between Nirvana and Green Day, yes, what I remember. I mean, I was just a kid who like fell deeply in love with what was going on, but I remember that period as being like a time where just a lot of stuff started all of a sudden coming into my periphery as a kid who probably just had like MTV or something, because I remember like I feel like, I don't know, we get so inundated with like memories of grunge because there was a lot of like grimy, grungy, like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots. But I also remember that being the time that like I really fell in love with the Beastie Boys. And I also really liked Beck and like things that weren't in like, I don't think the grunge realm, but that were getting like more play at the time.
Yeah, like alternative rock. It was a lot of alternative rock.
Yeah,
like,
alternative rock. And like, I don't know. I just don't like yes, we definitely got like a deluge and diminishing returns of like grunge. But just for me, it was a time where like I started to hear more about things that were previously in the underground. Like the Beastie Boys had been around since like the 80s. The Beastie Boys at that point had probably been around for like a decade, but all of a sudden like Ill Communication came out and I was like, oh my God, you know, and like, so I don't know, like I was just like more, and then we had like Woodstock at kind of like encapsulating it all, like Red Hot Chili Peppers and all that. So I don't know, that part of my life is like a little bit like it all blurs together. But really like birthed my interest in like so many different things. And talking about like what we were talking about before, everybody just being on the same bill. Like to me, I was like getting into Fugazi, and that weirdly to me was the same as like Rage Against the Machine. And I know that like kind of they are two politically minded rock bands, but like there's worlds of difference between Fugazi and Rage Against the Machine, but at the time they were just like all, it was just one side of a cassette and then the other side of a cassette to me. So I don't know.
I guess like when I was in high school when Nevermind came out, and like I was just like, you know, whatever. What is this like, you know, major label bullshit or whatever, you know, and it's grunge or whatever. But years later when I read Our Band Could Be Your Life, like I had never really thought of Nirvana as a punk band or as the product of punk. And I was like, because that's the case they were making. They were making the case that it was the product of punk, or that it was punk. And I was like, I guess that is essentially what it is. Like, I just never even occurred to me that that's the way to look at it. And then, but with Green Day breaking, like Green Day were very clearly and obviously a punk band. When they broke, it was a punk band breaking, even though you could argue that Nirvana was a punk band breaking into the mainstream.
Yeah. I mean, like disregarding the sonics of Nirvana as just being like, I don't know, a hard rock band, maybe you could say some like punk influence. I think the thesis of Nirvana in Our Band Could Be Your Life, or at least like one thing that I realize now is that Our Band Could Be Your Life documents this 10-year span in the 80s where all of these punk DIY institutions were cropping up because major labels did not care about this kind of music. So independent record labels were cropping up, fanzines were coming up, DIY venues and like, you know, MRR's Book Your Own Fucking Life, like bookers, like indie bookers, like a whole independent network cropped up, which you would probably like put under the umbrella of punk and hardcore and DIY. And that's what, to me, Nirvana rode and had this weird freak crossover into the mainstream. But so like if all these punk institutions had not started in the Our Band Could Be Your Life era, Nirvana probably would not have the platform to stand on to get onto a major label. I'm kind of like the wheels are wobbling on my brain right now, so I hope that made sense. But like that was kind of like what I did you guys hear that?
No, what was that?
No, what was that?
Sorry, I fucking perfect thing to talk about on a Jeff Rosenstock record, ska podcast. But I just hit play by accident on my computer, and Jeff's, not to brag, new record just blasting in my fucking ears, and he has this one part which, spoiler alert, there's like this insane blast beat part on it that just backs right up into this like ska part. And that scared the shit out of me. Anyways, what's the next question? What can we talk about? Jeff's new record is really good, everybody listening. Yes. It's really fucking awesome.
Go get Jeff's new record.
Hell mode, baby. I came on this podcast to do two things. Do promo for my buddies Chris Farren and Jeff Rosenstock and chew bubblegum, and I'm all out of bubblegum.
Who have you interviewed more times, Jeff or Chris?
Both of them. And like one time I was like hanging out with Jeff and I was like asking him a question and I was like, let me ask you something like, how would you rank these records if you had to? I don't know, something like that. And I was like, I'm sorry, this sounds like a podcast question. And he's like, Dan, you know that like two friends hanging out is just hanging out, right? Like it's not like an interview. And I was like, yeah, I do. I know what you're saying. Yes. Like I just like, he just kind of put me in my place about like, then it's just a phone call that's not recorded is not a podcast. It's just a phone call, you know, like, yes, I've interviewed both of the many, many times.
Ska becoming a mainstream genre is interesting because definitely Green Day, Offspring, Rancid, all of the sort of the punk becoming mainstream is absolutely the reason why ska landed on the radio too, because it was all the like punk ska. It was the very punk version of ska that landed on the radio, and I think it definitely primed radio. It primed labels. It primed all of that. But
it was also this thing too. I mean, I'm sure you know, but like there was a period in the late 90s where no movie geared towards like young people was complete without like a Mighty Mighty Boss Tone song on the soundtrack or something like that. You know, like I don't know how like ska became like the token soundtrack genre that like we just needed like 30 seconds over skateboarding or something and like Clueless. And that's what, you know, we need. But yeah, like ska just became like a fucking cultural touchstone for music at that time. Maybe like, is it No Doubt too? I don't know. You're the ska documentarian. Was like No Doubt, how much were they responsible for this?
Well, what's interesting, like, is that like there was definitely major label signings for ska bands before this Green Day or even Nirvana moment. Like Fishbone were on a major in the 80s. The LA band The Untouchables, I think they had what would be considered a major label deal. Mighty Mighty Boss Tones got signed in like 93, which is pretty early.
Wow.
Yeah. But they didn't really have a hit till 97. And then No Doubt, I think their first record, it was on Interscope in like 91. That album didn't really do well.
And then like the weird like also too like the like token ska soundtrack morphing into like a token brief moment of like swing and swing revival, you know, like the Cherry Poppin' Daddies and all this shit.
Cherry Poppin' Daddies were technically the only swing band that was also like played ska and had like were part of the ska scene. Yeah, I don't know too much about the swing scene. I did read my friend's book, Hell of a Hat, which touched on both.
Oh yeah.
And it was interesting to see sort of like where they did come from these very, very, very localized scenes, these bands, like these very, very localized, like nightclub specific scenes that they built these sort of audiences. But that thing got like way bigger than ska or punk.
You know what when I started like when I was researching Sellout, like one thing that I did was I like put together this like page in my notebook, and maybe I just started an Excel spreadsheet at some point, but like I just kind of put a lot of albums that I talked about, basically every album that I talked about in the book, like in a spreadsheet, and just got the release date for it, or like the approximate release date, because some of them, you know, are a little like iffy about when exactly they came out. But like it's such a mind fuck to see some of those at some point when you're just like, oh wait, Rocket from the Crypt was like way before Green Day, you know, like it's just like, I don't know, like just I get weirded out when I realize that the things that all have blended together in my mind as being like the late 90s. I'm like, oh no, actually there were like 3 years of separation between this thing, and it kind of like blows my fucking mind, you know?
Yeah, so I think what I was getting at though is that like I think there was like years and years and years of like ska bands and labels like trying to figure out what to do and how to like market this music, but it wasn't really until punk broke that it kind of opened that door for ska to sort of have an actual real mainstream moment.
Yeah, I'd say that's right. And like the punk that was picking up on MTV and stuff, like it wasn't like Discharge. It
Yeah.
was stuff that's like ska adjacent. It just a lot of times like didn't have the horns in it. Like I even think like the Rancid singles that got popular on like MTV, like those were kind of like in line with ska. And like Tim, obviously like coming from Op Ivy, had like up tempo sensibilities and stuff like that. So I think like even and like even Green Day too. I mean, like they were like a pop punk band. It wasn't like they were like very hard. So I think like that stuff. Yeah, you're right. Like the pop punk of it kind of primed people for like the ska sounds. It's a short jump, between Effects and yeah.
Because look at like Real Big Fish or Goldfinger, Less Than Jake. It's pop punk ska. So it's very much in line. Yeah.
Aaron, can I tell you how many fucking people still to this day will hear the title of my book and be like, "Wow, did you write a fucking biography about Real Big Fish?" And I'm like, "Oh my god." By the way, have you ever had that guy on the show?
I have not had him on the show, but I interviewed him for my book.
Interesting. When I was like trying to compile like extra material for the Sellout paperback, I like pitched it to his publicist and thought it was like a no-brainer. I'm like, hey, I wrote this book that shares a title with like his breakout song that he wrote about like what this book is about. Can I interview him about it? And they turned me down. They were like, oh yeah, he's not really doing interviews right now. And I was like, okay. I mean, that's fine. But I was just like, seems incomplete without it.
Real Big Fish have like quietly broken up since the pandemic.
Is that it? I think, yeah. It didn't sound like the way he put it is like, oh, he's not really in the doing interviews phase. Right? I don't know how he put it, but it was just like didn't sound like it was something that was at the forefront of his mind.
Yeah, Real Big Fish basically were touring like 200 plus days a year since like 96. And then obviously pandemic happened and then they just never came back. And it sounds like from the rumors I've heard, it sounds like they're not coming back. Like he's done. Yeah.
Rumors. I love it. I love doing rumors on a podcast. What else do we got? That's good. That's good, juicy goss. Yeah. I love that. The last time I saw Real Big Fish, they had like bowling shirts for sale, and I was like, should I get a bowling shirt? Is this should be who I am? Like I'm looking for a new personality, and nothing says that like a bowling shirt.
You can always get bowling shirts.
Yeah. For $50, I could change my whole personality right now.
So the Silver Sprocket show, you posted a flyer for the event. And one thing I love is that people who follow you, they made multiple comments like, I think this means you need to make amends with ska. And then
really?
And then been waiting for you to admit you love ska.
Man, do they? I wonder what that stems from. Like, what? Do I have a public vendetta against ska? I don't think that I do.
Now is your time to clear the air.
I think it's just because what it is I'm a snob and people assume that like ska is target number one for snobs. But I don't have any particular vendetta against ska. I think that like ska, like any genre that got popular, had a decent core pioneer group, and then we got diminishing returns, right? It happened with pop punk, it happened with hardcore, it happened with emo, to like the fucking nth degree. Like there were some really good, talented, unique pioneers. And then we got a couple of many years of copycats. So that to me was always like my thoughts on ska. Like I like probably the tent poles of it. Like, I mean, beyond the like, madness and like the early 80s stuff. I mean, like just what got popular in the 90s. Like, I fucking love Keysby Nights. I love that album. I love Turn the Radio Off. I think that is a great album. I never was a Boss Tones fan. I can listen to them, but I never was like huge on the Boss Tones. Trying to think what else. I think my ska palette was like rather limited, but I really enjoyed what I liked.
What was your take on the Streetlight Manifesto re-recording of Keysby Nights?
I don't know too much about that other than that's like one of those victory records, like fucking dark spots. And there are many of them. But like, I think like years ago, maybe I tried to interview that guy about it. And I feel like he like legally could not even talk about it.
But what do you think? What do you think of that version compared to the Catch-22 version?
Oh, I don't really know the Streetlight version very well. I think I've listened to it; it's fine. But like the Catch-22 version is so deeply ingrained in me that's the version that I want to listen to. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really have hard like opinions. I will say that like one. I feel like during COVID, I got like really into, as a lot of people did, just like watching more YouTube videos of like shows that, you know, you maybe have been to or whatever you can find on YouTube, because people just like missed live music. But I remember like watching a solo set from that guy. And first of all, I did not realize that he is like Scandinavian.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, but yeah.
I must look it up, because how I didn't pick up that he has like this like very crazy accent. I don't know. But I was like watching solo sets that he did. Like, what is his name? Kato or whatever? Like,
but it's like
Tokay.
Yeah.
Is it Thomas Kolinski?
Yeah.
That would be Tokay. Yeah, he is from Czechoslovakia. And he has like a very like distinct accent, but I was like watching like just solo shows of his on YouTube, and I'm like, man, he's a really good songwriter. Like, it's just weird to hear it without like all the ska stuff, because I just feel like it could have easily have been like an emo record or like a grungy like Sunny Day Real Estate type of record. Like, it's just good songwriting. He just happened to add like a lot of like horn sounds to it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I like about Sellout is the amount of like the minutia of like things happening around these bands and these scenes. So you might get like 2 paragraphs on like some obscure band, and that's all you get about them, you know, which is, you know, it's cool. And like the one that like my favorite personal for me was in the Donna's chapter, when you're sort of talking about that sort of garage rock scene that they came from in their early days. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the Vulcaneers, who was a Star Trek themed garage band. Yeah. Because that was Jerry Lundquist and Lars Nylander from Skank and Pickle. That was a side band that they did.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. They were both. And also Shannon Smith, who is Kurtwood Smith. That's the father of That 70s Show.
I know who Kurtwood Smith is. I ran into him at a coffee shop, the same coffee shop from I Think You Should Leave that I mentioned.
Well, his son,
I got very excited.
Son was in this band.
No fucking way, really?
Yeah, and I had a band briefly with Shannon Smith as well. We were called what were we? The Sudsmen. Yes, our gimmick was garage rock, but we wore 12-pack beer cases on our heads.
Why was everything a fucking gimmick back then? I'm not ragging on you, but like, why was everything like a fucking like?
That was the garage rock scene. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was because of the Mummies. I think the Mummies sort of like made it. I mean, the Mummies were cool, though.
Yeah, there was like that Donna's thing was funny, because I learned that there were like 2 like Palo Alto base, like a Palo Alto based like garage rock record label, and all the bands were called like the Apes, and they all wore like ape costumes, and this band was called like the Vulcaneers, and they all wore like they just like Captain Spock, and I'm like, why was everything a gimmick? Like, it's just so funny. But yeah,
I just think that for people into that music, they would get those Nuggets records, and it was like they were cool because they were kind of shitty. So they were sort of trying to create that sort of like cool but shittiness.
Mm-hmm. And now I feel like that's so fucking popular.
Yeah.
like that cool shittiness now I feel like is like the fucking style among like 20-year-olds, you know?
Yeah, for
That
sure.
like indie sleaze shit that's coming back.
Indie sleaze. I see people post about that, and my eyes glaze over.
Me too. Why is that? Let's dissect that. Why do you think that is? I have the same reaction as you do.
I feel like we have the distance from it at this point to see that like having shitty recordings and like having stuff suck, like it just when you revisit it years later, you're like, oh, this is not great.
Yeah.
But like if you actually just go ahead and make a decent sounding record that'll hold up over the test of time, it's a lot better. And 20 somethings don't see that.
I saw some guy clearly younger than me tweet the other day. I'm sorry, he posted on x.com.
Oh God.
Actually, I just weirdly found it very quickly, and I'll read it to you because I feel like this is a very good conversation starter. This person said, anyone else wish they were an adult for 2000s Brooklyn core, like Tim and Eric, LCD Sound System, Mumblecore movies, Animal Collective, Santigold, etc. Feels like a subsection of culture which was roundly mocked at the time, but is still influential today. First of all, what one of those things have to do with like what the fuck? Like that was like the random assortment of 5 things. Like you picked like a comedian and like a fucking movie and it's just so bizarre. And then also too, that subsection of culture was not roundly mocked at the time. It was like very cool.
Yeah, it was like Animal Collective were like just hailed as geniuses in every single music blog you went to.
And especially like from our perspective, who liked like Alkaline Trio. You know, like Animal, like this shit was like the cool shit. Like what we liked was like corny and for babies, you know? But yeah, it's just weird now to see this person who's clearly like probably half our age, like really like romanticizing this fucking like indie sleaze time that we lived through, and we're just like, whatever, I don't know.
I mean, I like a lot of the music and stuff, but it just sort of the looking at it as cultural movements is harder for me because of my age. And just some of the trends that go along with it. Like I really like that band Big Thief, but when I see photos of them, not in the recent one they look weird for some reason, but just
where they just look like Okies or whatever.
Yeah, just like come on.
Yeah.
But I'm like, okay, I guess if I was young, like I would probably think that's cool. I don't know.
Maybe you guys like are on the same page as me, but like this kind of stuff doesn't bother me that much anymore because I think when you're a kid and you don't know anything, like you don't develop a real personality until you're kind of far into your life, right? So I think like when you're a young person, you just look for things to glom onto as your personality. It's why when I was 17, my backpack was fucking covered in band patches and buttons, like literally just covering yourself in other people's things. And then you get older and you're more comfortable with yourself and you don't need to do that. Like you have an actual personality. So I don't know, like now when I see something like Big Thief, I can listen to their music and enjoy it, and that's it. I don't have to care about what they look like or what wearing a Big Thief shirt looks like to the world, like what it says to the world. I just like, it's not my fucking personality. The same thing with like Turnstile, and I'm not going to get into Turnstile bashing, but like kids are so fucking into Turnstile, and that's great. Like not taking any enjoyment away from that. Have fun. But to me, I'm like, yeah, I will listen to this record in the gym. And that's it. I don't need like any further, like, I don't need to like wear a Turnstile shirt. I don't need to go moshing. But if you're just getting into hardcore, I see why it's appealing. I just don't need to make it my whole fucking personality at this point in my life, you know?
All right. Yeah. I'm with you.
That's my take. That's Dan's take on new music.
Thank you for listening to In Defense of Ska. To support the show and hear more, please sign up for our Patreon. Intro and outro music by Slow Gherkin from the EP Lives. Download it on Bandcamp. Please rate and review the podcast and tell a friend. Follow at In Defense of Ska on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. The book In Defense of Ska by Aaron Carnes is available from Clash Books. Order it online. Chris Reeves of Ska Punk International is our editor. This is your co-host, Adam Davis of Omdegon, leaving you by saying ska now more than ever. Remember when you thought Dan Ozzi didn't like you?
He likes me.
Authors unite. And how do we know he liked you? Well, because we invited him behind the curtain, our little clubhouse, over on Patreon. So you can hear more of our conversation about Sellout and punk and ska and all the good stuff. It's only $5. Head on over there. Give it a listen. Aaron, who do we have next week?
Next week, we have a guest so amazing, I can't even say their name.
Oh my goodness.
It's going to blow your mind.
Do you own a business? You can now offer your employees health benefits, such as no-cost doctor's office visits and free prescriptions for just $35 per employee. River Health is a subscription plan that offers affordable health benefits to companies of all sizes. Tap the banner to learn more about why Fortune 500 companies and small businesses trust River Health with offering health benefits to their employees. Or visit riverhealth.com to get started.